I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
السيد الرئيس أود في البداية أن أشكر
President, at the outset, we should like to thank Sierra Leone for convening this Arria-Formula meeting on an issue of utmost importance, that is the global race for critical minerals. Africa. Global competition for critical minerals is on the rise, especially as part of the green energy transition. As a result, demand has risen in rich countries for these resources, especially those located in Africa. The UN panel on critical minerals for the energy transition, dated 2024, according to that report, global demand for these minerals is going to rise threefold by 2030 and fourfold by 2040. President, the presence of critical minerals in the framework of illicit smuggling, the absence of effective governance frameworks, fair regulatory frameworks, inter alia, are resulting in heightened risks of the spread of corruption, the inability of some countries to make the best of these resources, and instability. Effective governance and security has meant that pockets of the African continent have become hotspots for trafficking, conflicts, and long-term instability. In some regions, armed groups, as well as criminal networks, are exploiting mineral resources to finance conflicts, to undermine state authority, as well as to threaten cross-border security. Preventing these risks requires greater oversight and monitoring, but it also calls for comprehensive strategies, peace building, conflict prevention, development at the global level as well. By guaranteeing that mining resources support stability and development, this should be a key priority for national governments, for regional stakeholders, as well as for international partners. Initiatives such as the Kimberley process and the regional certification mechanism of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, not to mention the EITI, have all made valuable contributions to bolstering minerals transparency and governance. However, the impact on the ground has been limited in many instances. The rate of implementation is very uneven. Many of the aforementioned frameworks hinge on compliance that is voluntary. As a consequence, we see that there is not enough oversight or monitoring of the effective implementation of these said frameworks, nor is there enough political will. States bear sovereignty over their natural resources. Therefore, it falls to states the primary responsibility for implementing governance frameworks that are transparent falls to states. These governance frameworks should also ensure that everyone shoulders their share of responsibility, so that the extraction and trade in these minerals is of benefit to people and fosters long-term peace and development. Lack of effective, robust governance policies often results in illicit trade, tax evasion, forced labor, and the systematic exclusion of certain groups from being able to benefit from the wealth generated by these resources, which belong to these people. As a result, we're seeing violations of mining workers' rights, we're seeing child labor, children being exploited by armed groups, as well as sexual violence, especially that against girls. Therefore, Africa's mineral riches should become a pillar, a symbol of sovereignty, prosperity, and stability that is shared. It should not be a source of weakness or a reason for dependence. To get to this situation, we need states to take ownership, to be leaders, and to steer the management of their own resources. This is a pressing need, and it lies at the very heart of the AMV, the African Mining Vision, a framework that was adopted at the continental level by the African Union in the year 2009. This framework calls for transparent, fair, and improved or enhanced management of mineral resources for progress and sustainable development, as well as social development at scale. In keeping with the vision, states must adopt and implement policies so as to, first, implement long-term national revenues through licensing and taxation. Second, revenues from resource extraction should be invested in a fair fashion in essential services, for instance, education, health, infrastructure. The list goes on. Third, bolster industrialization and industrial development so as to ensure that African states can secure added value as opposed to relying on raw materials exports. Fourth, informal artisanal miners should be granted working conditions that are legal, allowing them to generate economic profits. Fifth, bolstering monitoring, combating corruption, illicit trafficking, and illicit financial flows, and this through independent institutions, transparency, and international and regional cooperation. Furthermore, multinational companies, MNCs, must shoulder their responsibility as well, and they can do this if there are rules which impose due diligence requirements in supply chains, as well as reporting and verification. Voluntary initiatives are not enough. We need implementation mechanisms as well as sanctions which would be dissuasive, in addition to new international agreements geared towards adopting global standards or criteria which would help us to bridge enforcement gaps. Mr. President, by way of conclusion, I'd like to say that Africa cannot be seen as the main supplier of raw materials for the benefit of foreign interests. The genuine value of these minerals lies in the ability to manage them in the interests of everyone and sustainable development. Moreover, we need to reassert the central role of states in keeping with African priorities in accordance with the African Mining Vision. This must be done to ensure that this wealth is not a source of instability nor vulnerability, but rather an engine for development, social justice, and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria for their statement.